What's shaking, cats and kittens? Rob Lee here for this month's presenting sponsor, Night Owl Gallery. Night Owl Gallery is an intimate, artist-run exhibition space showcasing the original paintings and fine art prints of Beth Ann Wilson. Also, it features curated goods from local artists and craftsmen. You'll be sure to find one-of-a-kind gifts, handcrafted jewelry, home decor items, along with a few vintage treasures. Located in the rear of 248 South Conklin Street in Highlandtown, across from the Sally O's, Night Owl Gallery is a unique space that brings together Wilson's love of the arts, community, and culture. Additionally, Night Owl Gallery hosts an array of arts and crafts workshops throughout the year and participates in community events, many of which are free and open to the public. So in this ever-changing world, safety is their priority. So feel free to join them and hit them up online at www.nightowl.gallery. Tell them Rob Lee sent you. Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I'm Rob Lee. And today's guest is Baltimore Music and Community Outreach Manager at WTMD, a NPR affiliate music station in Baltimore. We have Sam Sessa. Welcome to the podcast.
Rob, thanks so much for having me, man. It's really great to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. It's being able to talk music. It's being able to talk a little, because I want to pick your brain a little bit. So we're going to do that. But describe your work and your creative background. Like, what does that outreach manager, that Baltimore Music kind of resource entail? What does that look like?
My title is so weird, but basically I'm the Baltimore music person at WTMD. So like WTMD, we're, like you said, NPR affiliate music station. We do a lot of stuff for the community, in the community. We're mostly financed by members from our community here. And so we are super into Baltimore music, Maryland music. And we play it more than any other radio station on the dial. And every hour there's music from some Baltimore band or Maryland artist of some kind. And so we do a lot of did before the pandemic, a lot of concerts at the station. Sure. Because we have a performance studio in the station and we broadcast them live, and that's cool. And we do some concerts and other events like in and around the city, in and around the state. And so I help out with those as much as I can and kind of help bring Baltimore music to the airwaves, help put it in the pipeline at the station.
So that's interesting. Like, so in terms of the demographics that are with the station, like, is it specifically like super regional? Because I'm a little bit of a radio nerd. So is it like super regional? Is it broader? And the reason I ask that is there seems to be this attention around like Baltimore music and it kind of getting its due with some of this top 40 stuff or top 10 stuff. And in the urban, like kind of sector, what have you, of that's Baltimore club music in that song right there, and it not really getting its credit. So in terms of maybe the audience base, how broad is that audience and kind of what region? Is it purely here or is it broader that WTMD is working with?
Biggest listenership is here. It's from, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, the surrounding counties around Baltimore City. But we do have people listen kind of across the country, and occasionally from around the world, we'll get, feedback emails from Germany or wherever else. I should say I also host the Baltimore music show, Baltimore Hit Parade, which I've been hosting for 15 years in October. So I'm in it.
So the Hit Parade, what's the Hit Parade? That's one of my later questions. You're reading ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're all good. So give us that rundown. What is that? What is the Hit Parade?
Sure. So I play exclusively like music from Baltimore musicians and Maryland musicians. It's an hour. It airs twice a week. So it airs Sunday afternoons at 4 and Tuesday evenings at 10. And listen, I'm going to back up for a sec. Most radio stations don't even have a show like this. The ones that do, it's buried at like midnight on a Sunday or something. So they can just say they have it. But we actually we walk the walk, and we really do try and get like a pretty diverse mix of music out there, a couple hours. And what I try to do on my show is stuff that I feel is important, stuff that I feel is really good, regardless of what the genre is. Yeah. So, I'll do deep dives with Lafayette Gilchrist from the jazz community. I've had DDM on the show multiple times, like from the hip hop community and TT the Artist was on recently, but then also like, Super City and Dan Deacon and Beach House and, the more kind of prominent Baltimore bands as well. So it really is all over the spectrum for that. And then often they'll perform in studio, not as much recently because we haven't had people in the studio as much, but that's kind of the idea anyway.
No, I dig it. And it has the, like, when you mention something that's kind of buried, I'm a Morgan State alum, and I look at their radio program that would be on like super late, and I was like, yeah, this is buried. I'm not going to be up at midnight to listen to anything other than like the sound of myself snoring. So, it's one of those things. But when I was younger, I would go back through and listen just to get an idea of what kind of artists are we putting out there, because there is this belief, and maybe I want to get your take on it, this belief around, from a pop culture standpoint, from a music standpoint, who are the representatives from Baltimore, and what would it take for them to kind of break through and get in a larger space as being a Baltimore musician?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, hold on. Let me go back just a second. And I will give some props to Morgan, because they do have, and on WEAA, they do have some great shows. I'll shout out to Celine and the Music Lovers, who does Hip Hop Revisited there. So they definitely got some good Baltimore stuff and some good stuff. But to answer your question, I've talked about this a lot with my boss, Scott Mullins, who's our general manager, and I totally agree with him on this. What a musician traditionally needs to really help get out there, at least, starting on a regional, local level, is you need a good alternative weekly, like a city paper. You need to have a good radio station that champions music from wherever you're from. Yeah. And it really helps to have a great locally oriented daily newspaper. But I would say, in 2021, you need to have like enough of a network of blogs or websites or critics that notice it, that write about it, to kind of get like this, there's like a cumulative effect that happens with really any journalism, but especially music journalism, where it's like enough people write about you, then people start to write about you just because people are writing about you, or interviewing you because other people are you know what I mean? Like, so it does snowball. But you also have to have interesting music.
Absolutely.
But I think all those things together, like when they happen in tandem, like it really does make a difference. Like, we have seen artists come through from Baltimore that were not that well known before, that, we got behind early and introduced people to, and then, like, I'm not saying we're the reason that they're famous, but we were one step in that journey. It's interesting that you say that, as far as like the weekly kind of the free paper, and as I think you get, and there's no shade, no knocks, any of that to anyone doing the journalism piece here. But I think just adding to that view, if I, when it existed, I would get city paper, I would get Baltimore Sun, I would get a little bit of everything, or whatever free paper that was around. It's like, let me stack these up. I'm going to learn something that kind of makes it more holistic as to whatever stories are happening that I'm reading. It's like, I'm going to get that alternative point of view, and I'm going to get the official quote unquote point of view. And I think I would often go into like the more free publications, and it's like, oh yeah, so that's what's happening. There's a show that's happening at this place, and I'm going to find out about this band or this artist. And yeah, I think that's a piece of it, and a big piece. And I know for myself, if I go traveling, and I think a lot of the things, and maybe one of the byproducts of this podcast is to encourage people to come to Baltimore, check it out, is when you have a station such as where you're working at, and you're able to showcase the talent that's here, people are checking for that. I know when I go to a different city, I go to Atlanta, it's like, what is the Atlanta station? I want to get a temperature of this full immersive, what's happening here. And I think if you have resources like that, and you have stations that are committed to it, like WTMD is, then it makes a lot of sense for people coming here to get dipped, to understand really what's happening. Sure. I think that is something that strangely we are missing today, which is an easy place to go to get just a feel for what's going on that night or that weekend or that week, wherever you are. Like, social media was supposed to make that easier, and it kind of did for a little while, but now you look and it's like, unless you're paying to promote it or you have the right friends, you're not going to find it. Right? And that is a real shame, because it used to be where you could just go to some random city, pick up the weekly or the newspaper or whatever, and be like, oh, this is where it is. Or even like go to a website like Showspace for Baltimore, and it would have all the listings, but it's harder and harder to find. It's made it more of a challenge. And, it's a project that I've been working on,
putting together just lists of, I was doing it from a podcast space, but Baltimore related podcasts, putting together a playlist of that. But then it's a matter of how do you get it out there? How do you communicate it? It's like I can share it with the people that are in my phone that are on Spotify or what have you. But if I were to cast it to a social media platform, it's going to get absorbed. It's going to get eaten up and people aren't going to see it. So you aren't able to really share something like that unless, as you said, you're paying for it or you have some version of a hookup. And that's happening in various forms of media and music, especially. So let's switch gears a little bit. Outreach manager. So as an outreach manager, what skills do you rely on the most?
Begging people to come to our concerts. No, honestly, you know what it is? I wish somebody had told me about this before I started producing concerts, and really just any event, but especially concerts. Concerts are 90% emails and phone calls and 10% events and music. You know what I mean? Literally, I am always during lockdown, like when I was home with my kids every day, and they're homeschool or they're doing a virtual school and I'm doing virtual work, whatever. And they're like, "Daddy, who are you talking to on the phone all day?" And I'm like, honestly, I don't even know, but it's a lot of people, because building these relationships is what has allowed us to do these shows. We're a public radio station. We don't have a big budget. I can't go to, some band and be like, "Hey, I can pay you $10,000 to do this really cool show I have an idea for." Yeah. It has to be, "Hey, buddy, can you help me out? And, can we maybe work together on something cool?" And luckily Baltimore is a city with musicians that are always open to that, or usually open to that. Getting together and figuring something out. Okay, for example, there's a great vocal percussionist, Shodike. He's the best, I'm going to call him a beatboxer, but he does beatboxing and breath art and other vocal percussion, right? And he was doing this showcase called Embody, a showcase of the human voice. And he'd started doing it in the Wind Up Space and some other clubs. And I was like, "Shodike, we should come up and do one bigger one a year at WTMD, and we'll broadcast it on the radio." And we did, and it's become one of our more successful event series. And we were able to, just because of who, I've worked with and who he's worked with, put together some really, really great embodies. We did one with Dan Deacon and some other artists. We did one with Raul Midan and Bobby McFerrin's daughter, Madison McFerrin, and, just some really cool showcases of the human voice. And that's the kind of stuff I love working on the most. I do a show series called Classical Music for People with Short Attention Spans. And it's the best 4 minutes of all of our favorite classical songs from this and that. And I work with Classical Revolution, Raphael Dreisen and some of those other folks, and just super talented musicians. Again, they want to do something cool. And so it really helps to have musicians that have that share that mindset. And our biggest ticketed concert series kind of fell into, I have young kids. My kids are 6 and 8 now. And I was at a library and with some moms doing baby story time. Yeah. Wore my TMD shirt. And they were like, "Oh man, we love TMD. We used to love coming to your concerts, but got kids now. Can't really get out much, and I was like, "God, man, we should do concerts for us, right? Parents with young kids, and not Barney, but shows that I would want to go see at night, just in the morning." And so we do that. It's called Saturday Morning Tunes, TUNES. Nice. And, the biggest one I think we ever did, we had about 1,200 parents and kids there. It was nice. It was big. But we've done Fish for Kids. We're doing Yellow Dub Marine, which is this Beatles reggae band, in a month. Yeah. So, and at Power Plant Live or breweries or, places where you can go and maybe have a drink if you want to. And it's worked out really well for us. So, that's kind of a long way of answering kind of the outreach stuff, is by bringing people into our studio for concerts and art exhibits and movie series and things, but then also by doing concerts out in the community as well.
No, that definitely peels back the onion a touch, and sounds really interesting. You're able to, maybe flex those creative muscles more than you were giving yourself, how you're running into people, encountering them, and being able to, because even if it's I would imagine a collaborative idea of coming up with the concert or coming up with the programming, that pitching it could be a little bit of a, it's so here's this idea I have.
Yeah. So, you know what the trick is, what I found over the years? you email the hard questions.
Okay.
Because everybody says yes in person, and you can't guarantee that that means yes, I'll do the show. Just because they say, oh yeah, this is a great idea. Yeah, let's do it. You know, It doesn't mean anything. You have to get an email yes. Once you get an email yes, then you can follow it up with like a text conversation or, you know, a phone call. But you got to go with a soft ask on the email first.
Noted. That's a good gem right there, because I think in just the notion of outreach and people are. I'll say here in Baltimore that people are very, once you're in and you're in a community or numerous communities or numerous tribes, or however you want to deem it, once you're in, people want to work with you, want to do stuff with you. If they're like, oh, you're good, you've been vouched for. But because that's the nature, I think sometimes people are doing so many things that it's like, oh, I'm double booked, or I really want to do it, but I can't. And that's what I find on occasion with this pod. And you know, like, as you can probably see, there's 2-3 episodes going out a week. And I'm like, okay, this would make sense to go this time. Let me give some love to these people here. Oh, man, I've recorded that 3 months ago. Let me get this out there. And I find myself kind of diving into it and being absorbed. But it's a really good feeling to be able to work with so many different people. So how's that felt for you to be able to work with so many different artists that are doing really good stuff here? And I would imagine, as you touched on, you know, having that interesting music, having that stuff that's like, okay, yeah, I like what you're doing. How's that been?
You know, you talk about like bringing in different people, and it's something that I've become a lot more conscious of in the last maybe like 5 years or so, where I'll keep a running list now of the guests on the show. And like you do, I'm sure, like when you look at your thing, it's like, well, I've got Max Weiss in, I've got Justin Fenton in, I've got DDM, and you really do like bring in a really nice kind of group of different voices. And that's what I try to do on WTMD is I try to say, okay, well, I just had a rock band, so I don't want to have a rock band for the next couple of weeks. Like I want to have, you know, something what's different? What's, you know, how many different kinds of voices can I get in? Like, you know, male, female, you know, LGBTQ, like what different genres can I bring in? Because as you know, is what you're saying, like Baltimore. Okay. So I'm working on a short documentary about the Baltimore music scene. Mm-hmm. And in it, one of the first things in the trailer, one of the first things that this guy says is, you know, Baltimore isn't like Seattle in the 90s or New York in the 2000s. Like there's no one genre that defines the Baltimore music scene. Instead, there's this kind of attitude, this willingness to experiment, to kind of test the limits of things, to push boundaries. And I've always thought, like, or at least in the last 15 years of covering the scene, that's been really the one thing that makes Baltimore music. And so there's like, it's not like you've got the rock scene and that's it. Yeah. Like you've got everybody's more and more collaborating with each other. And concerts, which used to be like 3 rock bands, 3 rappers, 3 jazz artists, whatever, it's like a Spotify playlist. Like DDM was talking about this. Like you never know what you're going to get at a Baltimore concert. Like you could get, you know, 5 different bands from 5 totally different walks of life playing 5 totally different kinds of music. And so I feel like shows like mine and radio stations like the one I work for, we need to reflect that. And so that's what we try to do.
Yeah. At one point there was this, it gives me that kind of mixtape vibe, but not in a mixtape sense that, yeah, I'm going to have this particular genre. It has a theme to it. The only theme is that these artists are from Baltimore, have a connection to Baltimore. And the through line I would have with some of the stuff I would do, like in terms of what's popping right now, and I just remember it was like, I forget who I had this conversation with. And I was like, I feel like music has felt really weird for like the last 10 years or what have you. It's just like something that's lacking in terms of what you're encountering, like right there at the forefront. It's like something is kind of like missing. It's either the way it's being delivered or just things don't have that energy and that kind of like that I've been looking for. But I've been seeing it here. And I think that was like, wow, somehow it was right there around me the whole time, but I've been missing it because I was looking outwardly. And now I'm like, oh yeah, that's knock. That's been great. Like, you know, for like a song when Dark City came out, and Hey Baltimore, I know that song had been out for a couple of years, but when I heard it, I just kept playing it. I was like, oh, this is it's old, it's new, it has elements of different things that I like, and it's about my city. And I was like, oh, wow, I felt something for this. And a lot of times stuff is disposable, I guess, to use lack of a better term. And the stuff here has felt like kind of fresh and inviting. And it's not because I'm a homer, you know?
Sure, totally. I mean, that song is, like you said, it's a great example of, mixing a couple different things together, but it's got some of my favorite Baltimore musicians like Rufus Roundtree, Easy Jackson. I love those guys and have been working with them for many years. And dude, we did it. So when the lockdown was getting a little bit better last summer, I partnered with the Urban Pirate Ship. Okay. Remember that pirate ship that floats around? Yeah. And Stages Music Arts is audio production company. And we put on a floating concert where it was just me and the band on the boat and the crew. And Rufus Roundtree was the band. Yeah. And we went around and gave these little free mini concerts at like outdoor parks and stuff. And that's really fire. Like I knew that Rufus was the band for it because like it's one of the most broadly appealing music. Like you listen to that music and it like moves you, it touches you, no matter who you are, where you come from. Like that music and the way they play it, it's phenomenal. And hey, Baltimore, like it's great. It's like some of that. It's like some easy. It's like some, it's really nice.
And it's funny. Like recently, I interviewed Chariz, and so it's like I was joking. I was like, I've now had 2/3 of this song. I was like, I just got to get Rufus, and he's giving me this. He's like, there's actually a 20-minute version of this song. I was like, are you kidding me? He's like, Easy is rapping for 10 minutes. And Rufus is like just going off singing for like 10 minutes. It's like, look, I need this to be like 4 minutes. And he's like, I'm going to sit on it for a little while. There's a 20-minute version, just so you know.
That's great. Going back to what you were saying, like about older stuff still sounding fresh. Like I go back sometimes and listen to Teen Dream from Beach House, which is like 10 years old now, and some of that stuff, some of like Dan Deacon's earlier stuff, I go back and listen to. I give lectures sometimes on, this is so weird to say, but I give lectures on the Baltimore music scene from like 2000 to 2010. Yeah. And I play like, MIA because it's got Black Star on it, and I play some Black Star, and then I play some Toad It, and I play some Government Names from The Wire from 04, 05, 06. And some of that stuff still sounds really fresh. And it's surprising how good it's aged, how well it's aged.
Yeah. And I'm one of those people, like, this is ridiculous. I'm going to admit it, and I don't want to, but I go in and I kind of sometimes I just put something on. It's like, what does this sound like? And I'll just let Spotify just do it. It's DJ Spotify. And it was what is his name? It was a Paul Stanley song that just popped up, and it was like, oh, this is off the solo album. And I was like, this is fire. And it's just sitting there. Now, granted, he and I share a birthday, so I already have that kind of predilection. I have a list. My girlfriend gives me crap about it, but I have a list of artists with the same birthday that I have. So It's like him, Questlove, the dude from Tame Impala. It's just like, this is my list right here.
Nice.
And just like, why's Paul Stanley playing so loud? I was like, look, I like this song.
I haven't listened to that record, but someone was telling me about that. You're the second person to talk to me about that in the last week. I've got to check this out, right?
Yeah, you do. It's like the White Rabbit thing. You Belong to Me is the tune. I think that's the name of it. It's a good one. And it was 1978, and each member in the original group, they all released solo albums like in the same month. So yeah.
Little competition there. Not much.
A little bit of a show. So in the various hats that you wear, because it's not just isolated to, because you touched on, you do lectures and stuff. It's not purely the outreach role. It's not purely covering Baltimore music. All of those make up, but ultimately a lot of the work that you're doing there, because you even touched on the filmmaking aspects. So you're doing a lot. What do you love most about what you do, and why?
So I was thinking about this because I listened to some of your old podcasts, and you start off with like the big picture question, like, pulling back, like, bird's eye view of what you do. And I thought for myself, I think if I could sum up my career, like at the Baltimore Sun, at TMD, all the projects I've done, I would say I see myself kind of as a cheerleader for the arts and music in Baltimore and Maryland. I feel like that's what I've done ever since I started working professionally. And you were talking to Justin Benton about this, and you asked him like, what about the good stuff? You ever cover the good stuff? And he's like, no, I leave that to like the features folks. And I was one of those folks. I was a features folk for like 10 years at the Sun, writing about, and I would let the Justin Fentons handle the crime and the corruption and whatnot, because I didn't want to tell those stories. I want to tell the stories of like Wendell Patrick, and / Kevin Gift, and like his amazing talents and his life story, and like the show decays, and like though that was always more interesting to me. Like I always wanted to tell people about something they didn't know that wasn't bad, like something that was good and different and interesting. And so that's how I kind of see like my body of work, my career arc has been trying to tell more people about what's happening in Maryland, what's happening in Baltimore specifically.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it really aligns with what I try. I had to write up something earlier and I was like, how can I really express this? It's like, I know what it is, but I'm too busy doing it to really get into the minutia of describing what it is. But ultimately, if I were to break it down and had to in that scenario, it's like, I just want to add to the conversation and not try to say, oh, none of this is happening. No, obviously this is happening, but also these really cool, unique, and very specific to Baltimore things are happening that often are getting overlooked for a multitude of reasons. And I think that that's what the crux of this is. Like, I have guests on, I just let them talk about, I got questions, but pretty much it's free reign. Just get yourself over ultimately, and using wrestling terms. And, sometimes people kind of get it and they put forth their the ideal of what they want to put out there in terms of like a brand or themselves as creative. And as I was saying to you before we got started, some don't. And so that's what that is. I got a few more questions here. So you did the entertainment writing for a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was the nightlife columnist and the local entertainment reporter at the Sun.
So I want to ask you this, and you've probably heard this before. So it's pop culture oriented. Baltimore is starting to pop up a little bit more recently, and maybe it's 5 years. It's like after something really public happens 5 or 6 years later, we got to start covering the city for some reason, which has already been covered to begin with, but in a very great way. What do you think filmmakers get right about Baltimore, and where do they fall short in maybe covering the people, maybe covering the entertainment scene, or maybe just covering just different stories that are here? What do they get right, and where do they fall short?
Sure. Man, that's like, that ties into that question where it's like, I would get so frustrated when you go out of town, you tell people where you're from 10 years ago, and they're like, oh, like The Wire, right? It's like The Wire. Always The Wire. That I hated that conversation. And I felt like we were finally getting away from it, and then anyway. But the thing is, The Wire gets at a truth of the city. Truths about this city. And that's what makes it resonate with so many people, and I think that's what makes the work of like Matt Porterfield resonate with a lot of people, because he gets at like some truths about the folks that he puts on screen. And so did David Simon with The Wire. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like whenever you do something like that, you're always leaving something else out, because you're working in a tiny little box with a limited cast, and this, you can only interview so many people. You can only spotlight so many things. And so that's the tricky part, is what do you leave out? Not what do you put in? A lot of times it's what do you leave out? Like what doesn't make it? I feel like that can color people's perceptions of a place, of a scene, of music. And The Wire certainly did that for us, not always in the best way. The last season was about the Baltimore Sun. It was about some guy who was plagiarizing all his stuff. And it was like, oh God, like as a writer at the Baltimore Sun, when this was being on TV, like all the questions from all the friends and stuff. So, that was a little frustrating, but it gets at a larger truth for sure about journalism. So, I kind of come away from it feeling a little mixed, because I was a big fan of that show. I can't wait to see Fenton, the show about Fenton's book. Like that's going to be wild, but it's also kind of sad because, like this stuff all happened in Baltimore. Not a lot of it's good.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It was like a conversation I had with Sean Champion about, and I realized I name drop and it sounds so gauche, but I realized where we were talking, I think, about the show Atlanta, and I was like, why isn't there a Baltimore equivalent of it? And I was like, why am I not the person involved with it? It's kind of one of those things. And it just goes to maybe manifesting this, like, look, this has to happen. Like, there are some funny ass people here. There are some weird ass people here. It's like, why isn't there a version of Treme that's here? Why is it always soaked in some, keep it really funky and honest, some version of like black trauma or black tragedy, and then you pepper in some white folk, but really it's kind of there. Like, that's the point where we're at. And it's like, yeah, we got some weirdos here. We got a lot of different people here. And going back to what you said about how things are framed out, I remember people having, people always have their feelings and their takeaways of why something was excluded from maybe a property because there's so few instances where the properties have a spotlight on what's going on here. So if someone's omitted, then you feel like there's tea in a Patreon exclusive conversation about, so why was a 92Q involved in this? Where is this person at? And why is Frank Ski not in this documentary? And I think just when I always look at it like this, when you get the ball, you get the opportunity to make something that can go out there, what are you going to do? That's always what I look at. Like, are you going to try to do good? Or are you going to try to really cover something that or are you going to work with people? Or are you going to collaborate? What does it look like to really move the needle? Because there are other cities that don't kind of have that same problem in terms of being represented from a pop culture standpoint. It's like, it's Always Sunny in Philadelphia has been on for 15 seasons.
I know.
And it's kind of one of those things where, that's a show that's in Philadelphia, but it's not like showing the terrible things about it, showing like these scoundrels working at this bar or what have you. And it's like, I always look at, could this be done here? And that for me means the show is true. Could this be done in Baltimore? And what would the bar be? And all of that different stuff. That's the way I kind of look at these things and frame them out. In the last few questions I have. Oh, you had something?
Well, let me just add something there, because I think about this a lot too. Remember that we chased fame for a decade in this, like all through the 90s and early 2000s and mid 2000s. Baltimore musicians chased the record labels. And what? Drew Hill, Cisco, other than them, like, were there any major artists come out of Baltimore? No, they all got shelved and, buried on some back room somewhere in the record labels. Sadly, It was terrible. Like, there were some great talents. So the next generation that came in the mid 2000s were like, we're going to do our own thing. And if people notice it, great. And if they don't notice it, that's too bad, because we're still going to keep doing it. Yeah. And you look at that whole, like, all these bands that became popular, musicians that became popular 5 years later, they were grinding it out on the road, playing house shows for years before anybody really big noticed. Yeah. And, that's always been this whole wave of Baltimore music and arts and culture has been rooted in this DIY ethos. It's like, I'm going to do it myself because I'm not in New York. I can't just walk down the street and play some club show and become famous, or, become a viral Instagram star or whatever. I'm going to just work with what I've got. And so I don't know. There's definitely that vibe too in the scene.
And I think generally, in speaking more macroly, there's a certain taste here where we'll tell you if your stuff is garbage. We have no problem with telling you that. And I feel like a lot of people do use Baltimore, at least in the past. And I don't know from if it's different from your vantage point, that they may come here, cut their teeth, kind of get past the whole trial by fire situation, and then it's off to bigger and better things in their head. But once you've gotten over here, it's like, okay, I passed the Baltimore test. I've gotten out of the clause, and now I can go wherever else. And I think that's the thing here. Like, and I think it was a conversation with DDM I was having. It's like, the performance is like the performance style that comes from DDM is really rooted in being here. Like, you can't do some BS. You really have to put on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, DDM's got that background as I saw him in battle raps in like 05 and 06 at the 5 Seasons and other places. Yeah. And just always, you can tell, you can often tell who's got that star power, whatever you want to call it, just that charisma, that presence. Yeah. And, and he did, like, even back then he did, you could just tell as Midas, like he was just like, whoa, who's this?
I ran into him the other day. Actually, it's the first time we saw each other in person. I was like, I know you. He's like, I know you too. It was great.
Nice.
So, in an interest in paying it forward, what would you say the best piece of advice you've received that you think would be appropriate to share with the folks listening?
I think, and this is all right. Here's something that I've just kind of learned and become more aware about. And maybe this sounds like I'm just being pedantic because I'm finally realizing it, so I should share it with you, but a friend of mine, Joe Giordano, he put out this book, We Used to Live at Night, all about, why are you laughing? You know, Joe?
Interviewed him last week.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Okay. So he put out this book. I've known him for a while. He did this Girls of Dundalk calendar back in 2006 that I wrote about for the Sun. We became friends. Yeah. And when I was doing the nightlife column, we would go all over the place. And he had, I think, Michael Anthony Farley write about it in one of the essays in his book. Anyway, the point is, he acknowledges this too. He wouldn't have been able to take any of these photos if he wasn't a white guy. And as that, he could walk around the city at any hour of day, on any day, and feel not unsafe. And I was the same for me. I would go to a gay bar in West Baltimore. I would go to a jazz bar in East Baltimore. I would go, down in Brooklyn and all over the place. And I almost never felt unsafe. And I didn't even think about that. I didn't think about that until just recently. And what that meant, because, not everyone can do that. I'd say most people can't do that because of, who they are, what they look like, how they dress, like that kind of stuff. And being aware of that and being aware of the music, the platform that I have, and my responsibility to kind of present the most diverse group of voices that I can, like that to me, I think what I would say to somebody who's getting into journalism is just think about who you are, how you present yourself, and what you're presenting. Yeah. I think that's some of the most important things, because it doesn't really matter how famous they are, because to have a good music or have a good story, that's really what's important. And to make sure that you're representing the people that you're supposed to be there representing. And I don't know, that's kind of what I would say, I guess. Sorry, it's kind of a convoluted answer, but I'm still kind of figuring it out myself.
No, it's a thing where I think ideas, I think beliefs, I think realizations and so on are living things. And that's what it is. It's like, it's growing, it's developing. It's like, because I know that, and I'm sure people who's listening, like, oh, you ramble. It's like, I do, because I'm always kind of thinking through it. And it's like, oh, well, maybe there's a different way to answer this question to get a more robust answer out of it. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, and coming to that realization sometimes of like, oh, this is what this looks like. I, have to juggle with it where, people don't see me until they see me. It's like, I'm 6'4", like 300 pounds. It's like, oh yeah, you don't have any problems in real life. It's like, I do, but I may not have the same problems that someone else has, and, feeling unsafe or whatever. And so definitely I understand where you're coming from. So now the last question I have before we get to shameless plugs, everyone's favorite part. Which words or phrases do you most overuse?
Oh man, okay, so I have some questions that I ask over and over again, and people that listen to the show probably are sick of hearing. One of them is, I don't believe in super specific questions, unless I've really, really thought a lot about it, which is almost never the case. I start off with like, tell me about your new record. Tell me about this tour you just came off. And then you can kind of guide the conversation from there. But I'm sure people are like, tell me this and tell me that, like a psychiatrist or something. And I also always ask about names, like what's the significance of the name of your new record or the name of the band? What's the story there? Where did it come from? And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I use those two questions way too much.
Yeah, I've tried to go through. I keep like, this is really inside baseball, but at least you probably get this, but I would put together like, I go through other people's interviews. I watch other people's interviews. Like, how can I ask this same question and get across? How can I get more meaning out of it? And some of them are psychology questions. Some of them are purely because I realize sensitive individuals sharing things that may have a more intimate kind of like framing around it. And sometimes people are just super sensitive about their projects and don't want to just sit there and talk about it, but they want to, and some people just will go deep into it and don't want to cut off. And so it's like trying to monitor and curtail the questions, because, you know, sometimes people just think, oh yeah, you just ask a bunch of questions off the top of your head. Absolutely not. You can't.
No,
and
you usually sound like a dummy by the time you're done. Because people realize you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I kind of border on being at both spaces. Like, I have an appreciation for what people do. And it's like, some people, like, I remember when I had Ern Hankin on, episode that hasn't come out yet. And I was like, you do a version of what I want to do. And I was fanboying out. Or even when I had Ern Brown on, I was fanboying out. And other instances, it's like, I may not have a certain amount of energy. Well, not energy, but same interest in a particular area as something that's really in my wheelhouse, but I'm still interested in, tell me more about this, and trying to get down to it. It's like, I want to learn what your story is and why you're doing it. And there's some weird people here that do really interesting, cool things. There was a guy that need to circle back with that does like mini displays in Altoid cans. And he gets really, really detailed with it. And they remind me of, it was this, I'm blanking on her name, but it was a lady that did the original setup for like murder scenes. She did the displays of it and show like this. Yeah. So it reminds me of that. He did one that was just different Altoids cans, the smallest ones. And together, if you get them all together, they make up the operation kit, like the game operation.
That is awesome.
So I'm like, this guy is interesting. Like, why did you choose that? It's like, I know nothing about what it takes to do it, but that right there is interesting enough to, in an Atlas Obscura sort of way, to bring me in.
Totally. Love that. I would love that. I'm just picturing the smell in my head of, like, you know, Altoids can, empty Altoids cans. Like, minty fresh.
Cinnamon. So in that cinnamony way, shameless plug time. What do you want to plug? Social media and all of that good stuff.
Sure. Well, I don't know. We've got we don't have a ton of concerts coming up these days, but we're working on announcing some. I guess if I'm going to plug anything, it would be WTMD.org. Check out the site. Follow us on IG at WTMD Radio. And hopefully got some more cool announcements coming up. And the documentary. I named it after this band Ponytail, and they had this record, and we named it after that. Do Whatever You Want All the Time, the Baltimore music scene, 2000 to 2020. And that should hopefully the trailer will be coming out soon, and the documentary will probably drop like early 2022.
Okay. That sounds great. Thank you. So I don't have any more questions, and I guess I'll sign off. And this has been great. This has been a treat. Good day to wrap up a Tuesday. It's Tuesday, right? So
it's been really nice, Rob. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great just talking about this stuff. It's really cool.
You're welcome. So for Sam Sessa, I am Rob Lee, saying that there is art and music in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.